Hello, I'm Neil Dealey, co-founder and partner of Architects and Urban Planners Metropolitan Workshop. Welcome to Reshaped, a podcast series to mark our 15th year and to record perspectives on how the built environment is changing and needs to change in this historic moment. We asked leading thinkers and doers to respond to issues highlighted by the pandemic while we're in the throes of change, and memories and perspectives are fresh. Has the door opened to a new era? We think so. The pandemic has been a shock to Dublin city centre, with 70% fewer people going there, so the plight of homeless people was no longer hidden. Inequalities around housing, access to private or public amenity space also became very evident and increased the urgency to solve the city's issues. But the absence of cars was quite wonderful, our speaker in this episode reports, and opened up opportunities for improving how the city centre can be used by all, and perhaps tempt new residents to live there. It raised for her the key question, who is the city designed for? She is Suzanne O'Connell, landscape architect for Dublin City Council's Parks and Landscape Department, and co-founder of London-based design collective The Decorators.
My name is Suzanne O'Connell. I work in Parks, Landscape and Biodiversity Services in Dublin City Council. This is a diverse team that manages the green spaces and the green infrastructure of our city. So I've been living back here for 2 years. It's wonderfully exciting to be living and working in the city that I grew up in. I had lived in London for 10 years and co-founder of the practice there, The Decorators, which was really about engagement in public realm design. So bringing a lot of those skills back to the city. Working in parks is fantastic. I really kind of believe that the parks are the heart of our city, the places where the public come together. But as has happened with other cities, the pandemic has shocked our city and also, really kind of brought changes to the way that our public spaces are used. Some say that there's been a 60 to 70% reduction in footfall across the city. But I actually do think that there's been positive and negative elements. It's been a chance to see the city at a slower pace. But I think one thing that I saw, I live in the heart of the city with my family, 2 minutes from O'Connell Street, our central street. So it's a bit like living near Oxford Street. So a big thing that we've seen in the city is, the homelessness and the pain. And these were the people that were still living within our city when other people moved out because of the pandemic. And they weren't hidden by the distractions of work and shopping. So the pandemic has really given us a clear presentation of the inequality within our city. And so it has increased the urgency of the work that we need to do as a society to focus and solve the significant housing crisis and inequality. But, there has been some other positive aspects that we've seen. Firstly, what happened with this lack of commuters and people coming to visit the city. There was no cars. And as the mother of a 2-year-old within the city, this was quite wonderful. We went for walks. In our first lockdown, we were only able to travel within 2K. So we would walk around the streets very close to us. And we live on O'Connell Street, which is one of the main shopping streets. And this has very, very large boulevards, but actually, during kind of normal day-to-day, I wouldn't be letting my daughter walk off. But actually, she could run ahead of me. She could run and be on her scooter. And there was a real calmness. And it was kind of wonderful to see this infrastructure, kind of the bare bones of what we had. It was a place that was safe for a child. So, for many years, the focus of the city has been about attracting tourists and shoppers, but not necessarily a place for people to live. But, walking these streets in a calmer mood, you kind of reflect on, well, who was the city designed for? O'Connell Street was originally actually a place it was a residential square. So the topology of the building is actually built for people to live in. But The trend since the late 18th century, throughout the 19th century, was the idea to people to move away from the city. You know, the dream of the 2 up, 2 down with a private garden. And the city was considered a dangerous place, a place not really to bring up your family. And this was something that I experienced as well, because when I was born, my parents moved from where I actually live right now to the country to give us that life of the garden. But it's trying to explore, you know, what new relationships have developed with COVID. And what was been wonderful to see, especially as a public space designer, is, you know, this new invigorated relationship that people have to public spaces of our city. You know, I'm not too sure why, but, you know, Irish people traditionally don't have a strong culture of, you know, being outdoors for socialising. I think we preferred the cosy interiors with a fire and perhaps a drink in the pub. But now that that's gone, you know, the energy that has come into our public space is delightful to see. You know, I really hope that this is a kind of a cultural shift that's going to stay within Ireland. And this is something that we've noticed in Dublin City Council, in Parks Department, and the authorities in general, you know, the appreciation for what the role of parks, green spaces, trees, the need that we have for them within our public realm and within our city. But it's also highlighted the inequalities of people who live very much in the city centre. So back to, you know, where I live, you know, although we have wonderful architecture, large boulevards, we don't necessarily have those kind of micro-green spaces to dip into just very close to our home. And then from a parks perspective, it's been interesting to see the demand for green spaces, as I mentioned before, but I've been working in a certain area of Dublin called Stoneybatter. And in that area, it's very tight urban grain where really not many people have any gardens. And so what people have wanted there is their micro green spaces to be opened up and to be used. So there's been very small pocket parks, and the demand in those parks has just absolutely accelerated. And, you know, there's been this thing of people meeting out on their doorstep, and people have been calling for safe spaces very close to where they live that they can just sit down and meet a friend or a neighbour. And it's really kind of an extension of the front porch. So although COVID has asked us to social distance, it doesn't really stop our inherent need to be social. You know, we're social animals, so the public realm needs to support that. And this is something the parks will be working on in the coming years. And I suppose thinking back, like the WHO, they recommend that, you know, you have 0.5 hectares within 300 metres of where you live. But I think maybe we should be thinking more like 0.1 hectare within 50 metres of where you live. So these micro spaces. So where do we go from here? How do we continue to implement these projects? You know, you kind of question, why did suddenly all these projects just happen? Why were we able to suddenly widen pathways, put in cycle routes where we just didn't seem to be able to over the last few years? And I think these projects were going to happen, but they were stuck in indecision. And I think the pandemic moved these projects to essential. However, some of the public that I've spoken to have felt that these projects were pushed through without consultation. You know, but I wonder if you spoke to those people, you know, how many would be in favour now that might not have been before the pandemic. So where do we go from here? I think it's more testing, improvements of public space, but alongside deep dialogue. You know, if we are testing, we need to be true to that test and adapt to feedback so that projects happen through collaboration. So what was clear during the pandemic is that we have the spaces within our city, but we need to explore a different invitation, a different narrative of who our city is for. It is not just a place to visit, to shop and to do business, but it is also a place to live, to bring up your children and to grow old.
That was Suzanne O'Connell. Since the 18th century, the trend has been for people to move out of Dublin city centre. A trend reinforced by the city's more recent focus on serving shopping, tourism and workspaces. The pandemic has revealed the consequences of this exodus. But in the last 12 months, Dubliners have brought a new energy to public spaces and parks. A cultural shift that Suzanne hopes will become permanent, and revealed a lack of smaller, more intimate spaces that can serve the young and old. During lockdown, long-standing proposals to improve the city for pedestrians and cyclists were quickly implemented. The speed of this, however, disturbed some people. But do Dubliners who originally objected to those plans now think differently? There is a need for deep dialogue to discover a different invitation and narrative for the city centre that will answer the question, who is the city for? So Dublin can once again become not just a place to visit, work or shop in, but also a place to live, raise children and grow old in. A fairer city. You can listen to other podcasts in the Reshape series at all the major providers, or go to our website metwork.co.uk. Series directed by Lee Mallet, produced by David Michon and Justina Green, recorded and edited by Sean Crook.